We're going to introduce our next speaker, the keynote for today, Ken Delaney. He's the vice president at Gartner and a distinguished analyst. Ken Delaney is a vice president and let me start this again. Ken Delaney is a vice president and distinguished analyst in Gartner Research, where his research areas include smartphones, tablets, computers, notebooks, industrial handhelds, wireless communication, mobile software, device management strategies. So he probably knows a little bit about the topic that we're discussing today. He has been recognized by Adweek magazine as one of the top 20 technology industry analysts. Prior to joining Gartner, Mr. Delaney worked at Grid Systems, where he served as the director of marketing, portable computing. He was a key participant in the development of the first tablet computers, for which he received several patents. There are many things about my job that are unique and satisfying, says Ken. The ability to help clients with difficult issues, the freedom to think about what matters, unencumbered by the politics of some organizations, and the ability to use mobile technology that I cover as a fundamental part of my work are key examples. And he loves the toys besides. Please join me in welcoming Ken Delaney.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. Every year we do a survey of our CIOs, and this year we asked for the top 10 choices for CIOs. That's both from commercial, government, and education. And mobility is ranked number 2 behind business intelligence. Last year was number 3. So it continues to be a very hot and increasingly important topic among our client base. And that was certainly reflected in the latest CES show that was in Las Vegas last month. There were a lot of really exciting things that were related to mobile. Mobile is beginning to bring everything together. It's connecting people all the time. It's a theme across many, many different products. And just to illustrate some of the interesting products that I saw there, I thought we'd pick on our public safety people a little bit with something that I think they're going to like and something they probably don't like. So the one thing they're going to like is a little Israeli company introduced a product called Eye on Road, and you put your cell phone on the dash of your car, and it uses the front-facing camera in the cell phone to watch the road in front of you. It can tell you when you're getting outside your lane. It can tell you when you're getting too close to the vehicle in front of you. All kinds of great information that you normally have to spend a couple $1,000s on a vehicle if you want it built into your car. I think this product's going to cost about $35. You can get up on its the company is IONROAD if you're interested in taking a test drive. But the other thing that was there was Escort, who makes radar detectors, had a system where all the radar detectors are going to begin to talk to each other. It's kind of like Twitter for machines. And what they all do is when they spot someone on the side of the road, taking care of the speeders, they all talk to each other and say, by the way, there's somebody on the side of the road, and we want all the radar detectors to know about it. So as I said, that may not be popular with public safety, but it's an example of the way in which everything is getting interconnected for both good and bad purposes. Now during my presentation here, we're going to have a number of slides. We're going to have a lot of text on them, and in the spirit of mobility, we realize that everybody uses a mobile computer is really a multitasker. Now some people would say they suffer from attention deficit disorder because they're always sitting down looking at their phone while they're trying to do other things. But in that spirit, we're going to show you some things on the slide. We're going to let you read those. I'm going to say a few things and make the presentation a little richer and more conforming with the way mobility works. How do I advance the slides here? Oh, there we go. I guess I just asked for it. We'll cover 2 key topics here. We'll talk about the technology and where it's going. Of course, that's a very broad subject. We'll mention a few things of interest. And we'll talk about management and security. One of the most important things we talk about is a new concept we've put in place called managed diversity to replace the concept of standards. And as the Secretary showed, that's one of the most important things you're going to be thinking about is how to manage this invasion of consumer devices inside government. And we'll talk about how we've approached that with many governments across the world. Next slide. So let's go on to our first key topic. Next slide. Next slide. So we'll show you a few of Gartner's statistics. Gartner has a very extensive organization that keeps track of a lot of things that happen in the mobile world. And as you can see here on the left-hand side, open operating systems for mobility. Those are the iOSs and the Android operating systems and the BlackBerries. One where you can buy a significant number of aftermarket products. Those are growing in popularity, meaning that smartphones are fundamental ecosystems today that we have to pay attention to. And every day they're becoming richer and richer and richer. The very thought of 600,000 applications you can draw from is just really, truly magnificent. And almost every organization today with any kind of website is rushing to build a mobile website just like they did in the early days of the internet. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the growth of smartphones is not only affecting the United States and North America, but almost every part of the world. So we're becoming truly a global community with these pieces of technology. That means we can share ideas and collaborate and learn from each other much, much more. And there's a lot of peaceful purposes that I think this mobile technology will bring forth. Next slide, please. If we took a look at some of the device trends, we've segmented this into tablet computers, smartphones, and then the low-end smartphones that people use today. One of the things that I think is most significant about tablet computers today is with the introduction of the Amazon and the Barnes & Noble Nook, you're going to see tablets begin to drop below $300. I would say in 5 years, they're going to probably be sold in your local drugstore like they are calculators. My wife and I have declared 2 days as holidays in our household, even though they're not public holidays. When the time changes, since we have so many clocks and so many things, we have to get all the documentation out to figure out how to change our clocks. It takes us pretty much the whole day. People in the future are going to have tablet computers everywhere. They're going to be throughout your house. They're going to be showing pictures. They're going to be doing all kinds of things. If you bought an iPad 1, what's wrong with it? You're not going to throw it away. You're going to keep it. So we're getting less and less expensive technology. We're going to have more of it throughout our house, more of it on our desks. Fundamentally, your desk at work is going to be changing. By 2015, we think that many workers today are going to have at least 3 screens on their desk, and one of those will probably be a tablet. Windows 8 is the big event in tablets coming in 2012. We'll talk about that more in a minute. With handsets, Secretary talked about mobile payments. That's going to be enabled by a new technology called NFC, or near field communications, which permits you to sort of tap at the back of a cash register and transfer money from one place to the next. It also lets you do many other things that QR codes do today. Think of NFC as kind of an electronic form of QR code. We don't have to worry about ranging the device against the barcode. Lots more sensors. I'm going to talk a minute about context. The device itself is totally aware of what you're doing today. That brings up privacy issues, but it also gives us the ability to tell the internet much more about what we're interested in, so we don't have to spend all of our time looking for everything. Things are going to begin to come to you instead of you going to get things. And lastly, low-end handsets, to make up for that digital divide the Secretary spoke about, we're going to be able to have better handsets that are essentially free with a 2-year contract at most carriers. And this is going to bring a lot more people into the digital arena as they grow up and become productive citizens. Next slide, please. Now, a lot of people ask me about the devices. For many, many years, we've seen lots of different shapes and sizes, etc. As was said in my introduction, I was involved with the first tablet computer as part of GRID 22 years ago. So it's not a new idea. But we've seen a lot of experimentation in hardware. I have a bag over there by the table, and it has about 12 different cell phones in them, but I can tell you they all are black. They all are about this big. They're all about this thin. And they're really not going to change much in the next coming years. So the ergonomics of the devices really have been established. And I can put all the devices that I know are here today and will be coming on this particular chart. And this chart shows you that we have two basic designs of closed face, where the screen folds on top of the keyboard, or open face, where the device is permanently open to one's eyes. They come in different sizes, and those different sizes are really predictors of the mobility that people need when they purchase them. So where you're going to be across that spectrum, or where you're going to own several devices, will be determined by how mobile you want to be. And it's always a classic trade-off between screen real estate and the portability of the device. So as you begin to think about what to give people, those are some of the key factors. One of the things you may not know is how we define a smartphone. So actually, a smartphone is defined pretty easily. The low end of a smartphone is a device that has a 3.5-inch screen. And why a 3.5-inch screen? Because with a 3.5-inch screen, I can put it in portrait mode, put an on-screen keyboard, type on it, an iPhone has a 3.5-inch screen, and not make too many mistakes. When RIM BlackBerry came out with the BlackBerry Storm, they had a 3.25-inch screen. People made a lot of mistakes. The product didn't do well. The top end of a smartphone turns out to be 4.3 inches. Why is that? Because when I hold the device in one hand in portrait mode, it's the biggest screen where I can still get my thumb to the top left and right-hand corner of the screen. Now, there are some 4.5-inch and 4.8-inch smartphones, so the vendors call them. We call them tablets. So there's a bit of a definition for you that you can use. Now, our last row here talks about hybrids. One of the things that's happening today is the smartphone is becoming part of something else, as is the tablet. There are teleprompters today which consist of a mirror and a tablet, so the reporters can talk about them. I've actually got a picture of a beer dispenser that is totally run by an iPad. And at a robotics conference recently, they talked about the fact that tablet computers make great heads for robots because they've got more than enough computing capability to run the robot. And the good news, they can put a nice clean face on the robot, one that makes whatever the user feels comfortable with in that particular design. And of course, as we're showing here, your desk phone is going to come with a tablet, as is your printer. HP ships a printer today with a tablet computer. And this is a new class of hybrid devices that are coming along. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at the smartphones themselves, and we include tablets in this category because tablets are really just big smartphones in our opinion, you can see the different shares of the smartphone operating systems here, and that Android is clearly the number one. Apple's number 2 today. RIM used to be number 1. They've fallen quite rapidly, and I'll mention why in just a minute. And we expect Windows to grow mostly because of its partnership with Nokia on a worldwide basis. Here's some of the different versions of the operating systems on the right-hand side, but the one that people talk about most today is what's happening with Windows 8. Windows 8 today is being radically revised by Microsoft to include the Metro user interface. If you see a Windows Phone 7 device in one of the cell phone stores, you're going to see something called active tiles, these colored squares that you'll see on the front of that smartphone. And those are being brought to Windows 8 to put a new user interface on top of Windows 8 so that Microsoft can more competitively compete against Apple, which is dominating the tablet market today. The problem is that these are two different user interfaces, and your users on PCs are going to be in two different worlds. They'll be in the legacy world, where all your existing applications are, and they'll be in the new world of Metro user interfaces. And it'll take a lot of work to move from one to the other. It's going to take years for all the applications to be transitioned. So Windows 8 will probably mostly be for tablets. And I think that many of you will probably use Windows 8, or probably Windows 7, for quite some time on your traditional PCs. Now, after that, we may see a Windows 9, and I'm just making that up. I don't know that Microsoft's named it that. But at that time, I think there will be a great convergence between all the targeted platforms for Microsoft and the Windows operating system. So long term, we believe that Microsoft will put Windows on everything. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. What's happening as a counter to that is many of the other operating system providers were saying the future is not the operating system itself, but the browser that goes on top of it. So we're going to see a big battle in the next coming years to say, are we going to stay with the traditional operating systems of the past and committing ourselves fully to Windows, or are we going to start to broaden our choices, moving more into the browser? Now, a lot of you called me up and asked me about RIM. They say RIM's taken a big dive in terms of market share. Are they going to be around? First of all, I tell you they will be around. They're a very solid company, and of course many government agencies rely on them because of their security. No other operating system today can reach the security levels of a RIM BlackBerry. But the users don't like it anymore. They want touchscreen devices, and RIM has failed to produce competitive touchscreen devices. So many of you are now beginning to experiment with other devices, and you're adapting your policies and procedures to be able to accommodate those. What we tell you, though, is if you're moving away from BlackBerry, don't just replace it with something else. Go to a multi-device strategy where you can support the changes occurring here. We like to say that this is the fashion business, it's not the PC business. And I don't know about you, but it's difficult to figure out the fashion business. Why things succeed or don't succeed, how things change is something that is not easy to determine. And that's what's going to happen in this space. Things will change rapidly, and they'll change for reasons that we may not all understand. So it's very important that you build a strategy that is flexible and adaptable to these changes. Next slide, please. One of the great things about these operating systems is that they're bringing forth radically new user interfaces. So we talked a minute about Metro on Windows 8. These are new user interfaces, and they're beginning to make things easier to use. We're going to have speech recognition and gesture recognition. One of the big themes of CES was that things were becoming easier to use, getting away from the keyboard to some extent. Now, the military, realizing that many of the people running all the machines inside the military have just come out of high school, is trying to figure out how to teach people how to fire missiles without reading a manual, right? Now, that's a big challenge, but they're saying, well, look, these kids play games, they go in these very complex games and learn how to play them just by getting involved with them. And that's because it's a testimony to the new user interface. If you're writing some documentation, that's a symptom of too difficult to use. And you should look at some of these new operating systems and how they're being written to make your software easier to use. It's going to be demanded by everybody. I would argue that you can have a better benefit over sending someone to a training class by simply buying them an iPad and say, make it look like this. Right? Also, you put fixed size screens in front of your developers, and developers will copy Windows and they'll build for that particular screen. It's important to realize that you're going to have many different types of screens, probably 15 or 20 different types of resolution. So people have to be much more flexible about what the target device is. Next slide, please. We talked about the cloud in the previous session, and the cloud is very integral to mobility. Many applications today come with embedded cloud service, whether it's for storage or sharing things or collaborating, whatever it might be. So the good news about the cloud is it's kind of an instant backup. It protects you. So if you move from one device to the next or lose your phone, you've got all your content up in the cloud. Bad news about the cloud is that you're not sure what the cloud connects to. You know, there's the famous saying about 6 degrees of separation among people, that you can identify a relationship with anybody through 6 other people that you may know. And that may be true with the cloud. But that person that you don't know may be some porno site that you got linked into without knowing it. So the cloud is a great thing, but it can also be a dangerous thing, and you really have to think about the security aspects of the cloud. Now, another impact of the cloud is for developers. When your developers build applications for mobility, they should also expose the functionality of those applications via web services, so that other people outside the government can begin to build things with those web services and make them richer. You'll find great uptake in that regard. Things like traffic or other public services that you might provide. So don't just build a mobile web application. Make sure you have cloud-based web services that other parties can build in, and not everything will fall on you to fund the development of. Next slide, please. Many of us are working on what we call transactional systems. These are systems that take a process that's repeatable and make it structured within the context of our computing resources. If an event occurs in a predictable way, we can always make sure that happens accurately. But the real productivity benefits today are occurring when things don't go as planned, and we're able to use our tools to get in touch with each other to resolve problems. The whole collaboration space represents the low-hanging fruit for where you're going to get productivity gains going forward. Mobility and collaboration are closely tied at the hip. They, in fact, give us the capability to deal with these exceptions and problems and make sure they're resolved in a timely fashion. Video conferencing, texting, all kinds of voice communications, and other types of collaboration are available in an integrated whole on these devices. And the vendors are producing more and more integrated products. Today, when I pick up my email, I see a picture of somebody that I may not have talked to simply because their whole Facebook system is linked into my email system. I have a much better understanding of who I'm talking to. Video conferencing is a piece of cake today. And devices are getting cheaper and cheaper. At CES, there was a product called Biscotti, $199 1080p video conferencing system, 720p video conferencing system. You just put it on your TV, push one button, and you're connected to anybody on Google or with another Biscotti device. Much, much simpler than before. And the same will happen with many mobile devices in terms of collaborating via video. When workers go out today for the government to inspect something or whatever, and they don't see what they expect, sometimes the supervisor has to drive out there to make sense of what it is. Now you can simply take a picture, a video of something, transmit it back to somebody, no matter where they are, and leverage their expertise. Next slide, please. Context. Context has arisen in part because of the mobilities world to tell other sources of information about what you're interested in. If you think about today's internet is largely based on you getting onto the internet and going to find what you need. I don't know about you, but I'm getting so much information, it just takes me all day and maybe a few hours in the evening just to clean out my inbox so I can start fresh the next day. How many of you looked at the last page of a Google search? I can tell you one thing, it's not in English, and there's probably 250,000 or more things you find every time you do a search. So the bottom line is we've got too much to look at. And the only way we filter this down is to tell the internet or whatever services we happen to subscribe to little things about ourselves. What are we interested in? Don't put me in the banking site when all I want to really know is whether my bank balance fell below a certain amount. Tell me that that happened and give me the tools to go and do something about it. So if you look at the internet in the future, it's going to be much more context-driven. And of course, you have to give permission to take that context, of course. But if the user does give you permission, there are going to be many, many sensors that know where you are, what you're interested in, whether you're smiling or frowning, all kinds of things about you that the internet can use to filter down what it's going to give you. It's like a secretary. You know, a great secretary, be it man or woman, knows a lot of things about you and saves you time simply because they're able to filter out all the garbage that you don't want. And context helps us do that. Context is basically lots of inputs that are real-time bound to any decision that you're going to make. Next slide, please. So let's go on to our next topic. Here we're going to talk about some of the security management best practices and other development approaches that I think are relevant in the mobile world. Next slide, please. This slide shows you what we believe are the 4 cornerstones of good mobile management. First of all, on the left-hand side, we talk about mobile device management. These are the tools you use to make sure that the device itself is kept up to date with its patches, that the user is doing the right things, they're conforming to the best practice, and not sacrificing any of the security requirements of their particular agency. They keep inventory of what's on the device to make sure that what's on there is correct. You've probably heard of vendors like Good Technology and Mobile Iron and a few others. Next, we talk about governance, risk, and compliance. Not everything can be done automatically, so we need manual policies, policy documents that users have to sign when they bring their own devices into the environment. Auditing teams to make sure that what we're doing is consistent. Many of my clients today are hypocritical in the sense that they have spent all this money, time, and effort on their laptops, and they haven't yet realized that a smartphone is just yesterday's laptop made a little smaller. And so we spend a lot of money in one place and not enough in another, and we have policies that really don't work across the board. We need to have our auditing teams look at all endpoint devices as a collective whole to make sure that we're secure and safe. Legal. Legal is important. Now, the only problem with legal is that they would like us to spend as much money as we possibly have to protect all the conditions that will occur when we might breach security or the confidence of the public. We obviously don't have that. So we have to have a balance between the legal needs and the monetary goals. One of the things that happens here often is things get out. And I can guarantee you, no matter what I tell you about today, there's going to be some security breach at some point. Unfortunately, we don't prepare our agency heads enough with what to say to the public when that happens. It's going to happen. There's no way to prevent it. And we certainly encourage many of our clients in the government agencies to prepare their agency heads on what to say when something does get out in the newspaper, because it will. And lastly, insurance. Insurance is there because something will happen, and where there's financial concern, we want to make sure that we've invested in insurance to protect ourselves against that eventuality. On the right-hand side, we talk about network access control. Not enough clients deal with this particular topic. And I saw in the previous presentation we talked about identity management. This is essentially identity management. Networks today are going to be smarter about who's connecting and classifying those users in a way that gives them certain permissions to get to certain applications and not permissions to get to others. More and more, as more of these devices come from the individuals, you're going to have less ability to protect the device itself, and you're going to have to protect the networks and the applications that hold all the information. We'll do this by segmenting the different users and controlling application access through a variety of tools that we cover. And lastly, cost is important. As I said, you can spend an infinite amount of money with very little results. We have to realize that the more we invest in security management, the smaller the payoff potentially is. But one of the key mistakes our clients do is they take on responsibility for cost and mobility, but they also don't have the responsibility to do anything about it. If you, in fact, incur costs from use of mobility and don't charge it out or don't make the user and the supervisor aware of what those costs are, then you're going to get lots of complaints for which you can do nothing about. So we demand that our clients think about co-located responsibility and authority in any task they put forward. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide deals with the most important thing we tell our clients today. I probably get about 800 or 900 calls a year. About 75% of them talk about bring your own device. Why is bring your own device so important? Because the IT people cannot keep up with the pace of change for this fashion business. They're arguing with employees over whether the device really was broken or it just happened to get broken the day before the new iPhone shipped, right? And the poor IT people don't want to argue with the end user. It's a no-win. They want to be their friend. They want to help them. So, there's a lot of things that are very, very difficult. And the more operating systems you take on to support, the more questions you're going to have, and the support people can't deal with it anymore. That's fueling this bring your own device. Now, the problem in this with this invasion of the consumer devices is we're trying to use the best practices of the past, namely standards, to deal with this. I don't know about you, but I can go almost to any organization on the earth, and I can easily break down their standards. I went to a large defense agency about 6 months ago, sat down with their security team, and they said, we are only a BlackBerry shop. There's absolutely nothing else in here. Okay. Sales rep took me down the hall to the sales department. They've been using iPads for about a year. So I asked to go back to the security group, and I said, well, wait a minute. You told me there was nothing but BlackBerries here, but we just went down the hall, and we saw iPads. Well, we gave them an exception, right? Well, what's a standard if there's exceptions? There is no standard. So we have to realize that standards are just, they don't work anymore, right? Especially in this area. They may work for servers and other back-end things, but once they get broken, they're not workable anymore. In fact, people get creative. I would say I don't have any friends in this community, but I think some of the most creative people in the world are prisoners. Right? They can run mafias from solitary confinement, passing notes under the door and all kinds of interesting things. So if you make your users prisoners, they'll get creative, and they have shown that they will. So what we propose in substitution for the standards is a matrix, which I'm picturing here. The matrix is a set of support levels combined with user categories. And as you embark on that project that the Secretary spoke about, it's important you look at this. This is also a proposal where you don't tell the user what to do anymore, because they won't follow those directives. They actually get to pick where they want, and they accept the privileges and consequences of their decision. They're also going to share some responsibility with you. Today, many users want to do whatever they want to do and blame IT for anything that goes wrong. That's untenable. That doesn't work. So we want to put forth a proposal where they get to pick where they are, where they want to be, and they potentially accept some responsibility for their choices. Because to accept no responsibility and do what they want, there's no way you can do your job. So let's talk about each of how this matrix is put together. Next slide, please. Service levels. We have 3 service levels. One called platform, where IT takes on 100% responsibility for anything that goes wrong. One called appliance, where we're going to narrow the functionality of the device, and we're going to split the responsibility with the end user. And one called concierge, which is for those top-level executives that want to do whatever they want to do, and you have to support them. And for those people, they're going to take 100% responsibility for anything that goes wrong, although you provide support. Now, this is documented in a 20-page document written by me with a lot more detail than I'm going to give you today, but I'll take you through a rough scenario of how this works. The platform level is really your old standard, but you're not telling them what to do. You're saying, if you want the right to come and blame me for anything that goes wrong, then you've got to use the device that I've chosen, and I will own it, because the only way you can manage it fully is to own it. But in return for that, I'm going to build applications for it. I'll track it during its lifetime. I'll answer questions on it. I'll do all the things I do for notebooks and desktops. And notebooks and desktops will go into this matrix as well. The appliance level is named because what we're going to do here is we're going to narrow the functionality of the device. We're going to permit email and personal information management. You can get at applications, but through the browser. And we're going to let you do those things with baseline security, which involves the ability to wipe the device out if it's lost or stolen, the ability to force use of a complex password, and native encryption on the device. Given those parameters, and if you're using Microsoft Exchange, you can support 5 operating systems: Windows Mobile, Apple iOS, Android, Symbian, which is not too popular here, and of course BlackBerry. Windows Phone 7 is not acceptable today because it does not have native encryption. Now, if you don't need native encryption, then Windows Phone 7 is fine. For example, at Gartner, we don't require encryption on our devices, and we allow Windows Phone 7. Now, in this particular column, the most popular discussion is bring your own device. And so we say to the users that if you're willing to share some responsibility, you can bring your own device in. And three things occur. Number one, does the organization pay any money for the device? The answer to that is not usually. If you want to have the device paid for, then you're in the platform level. If you're bringing your own device, we're not going to pay for it. The reason organizations don't pay for it is because if in any way they own it, then they have some responsibility for the device. All the questions that they were trying to get rid of come back to them. The second choice is how do you pay for the service? And there's basically three ways in which it's done. The first choice, which is popular with the city governments, is all the bills come to people's homes. They're discounted by whatever the government discount is. And they're given a cell phone allowance in their paycheck. If they spend less than that amount, they keep it toward future months. If they're over that amount, they pay the extra themselves. Organizations who use this like the fact that the bills never come through accounts payable, and they know exactly what they're going to spend per employee. So it's pretty popular. The second choice is where all the bills come in centrally and they're paid centrally and never charged out. And we don't like that approach for what I said before, is that we have split responsibility and authority. IT is responsible for all the costs, but has none of the authority to do anything about it. IT should be responsible for the rate per minute, the rate per megabyte, the coverage and the quality, but never ever for what's spent. That's up to the department and the individual. And lastly, we have scenarios where the bills come in centrally and they are charged out, and we're okay with that. The last thing in bring your own device is what policy documents do you have to prepare for the users to sign when they bring their own device in. And we have three minimum things that are documented in the note. Number one, as a condition of employment, you must report your device when lost or stolen. Just like if you lost paper documents, and we'd want you to tell us about that, if you lose your device, you need to tell people about it. Some of our organizations are updating their code of conduct to say you must safeguard electronic devices in the same way you safeguard everything else. Number two, you must grant IT the right to wipe the device of its contents for any reason. They don't have to do that if they're worried about privacy and other things. They don't have to do that, and they can still do their work with a laptop. But if they want to use their own personal phone, they have to grant you the right to wipe the device of its contents. Now, all you really ask them to do here is to back up their phone, which they should do whether they work for you or not. If they have it backed up and you wipe it out for whatever security breach you're trying to protect against, they can easily restore it at some point later. That's all you're asking them to do. Don't get into exceptions about when you can wipe out the device and when you can't. You have to be able to have the right to wipe it in total if you need to. And lastly, and this is a bit complicated, and this is very important for tablets, you say to them, these devices are accepted for your convenience. You must read all email attachments on standard PCs and notebooks, and if you elect to use any other device, you, the individual, accept all responsibility for any mistakes or errors made. What we mean by that is many individuals will come to you saying, buy me this tablet, I won't need a laptop anymore, and your answer is no, you will still need a laptop. And that's because you cannot guarantee full compatibility with Microsoft Office if that's your standard. Now, if you're using a browser-based system like from Google, it'll be fine. And if a tablet works from it, it's fine. You also got to make sure the user doesn't ask you to buy so many peripherals that effectively they've made it into a laptop. It's kind of ugly, right? If they want an external monitor and they want a keyboard and they want all these cables, they may wind up with a worse scenario. Now, we're not against tablets. We like tablets a lot. And we realize a lot of people like to carry them around and type on them. That's okay. But we're just saying that you got to warn the user they're not completely compatible with standard laptops and desktops. I should also say a word with tablets. Most of our customers do not find justification for them and do not pay for them. They're always bring your own devices. Now, there are places that tablets work, and they're basically when you need to do your work while standing or walking, such as in the area of inspections. Okay, in the last column here is called concierge, and this is for completeness. These are for those individuals that want to use a device that you can't put in the first two columns. And since you work for them, you'll do what they want, and we have TCO numbers that will give you charge outs that you can use for these concierge services. They're very expensive, but given that you have to provide them, they can be very effective. And the best organizations actually turn these people into a productive resource. They give them new iPads every year. They get feedback from them on what's going on because they realize they can't stop it anyways. Next slide. Now we take these three support columns, and there's a lot more detail than I went through. I went through very quickly what they comprise, with user categories that are determined by the mobility of the user, the cost parameters of that particular user, and the security needs of that user. And you'll intersect those columns with these rows, and on the next slide. And you'll get a set of cells where you're going to get cost control, auditable security, and defined responsibilities. So basically we're saying, stop dictating what can be done here because it's not working. Let the user choose and take some responsibility. And break apart the standards model into different cells based on the support that the user wants combined with their user role. Next slide. Now, if you want to go beyond the basic security, you're going to be using some third-party tools. And this shows you some of the ways in which that's done. Some people at the top do nothing, and they're happy with the user just using whatever they choose to use. Some of those people just provide everything through the web. If you look at the bottom, we have much more sophisticated and, of course, costly solutions that provide policy management and other kinds of controls on the device. Go to the next slide. When you talk about mobile device management for these devices, the tools that are available fall into two categories. And these two categories are formed primarily because the smartphone and tablet operating systems are very different than Windows. When Windows was developed, it had an open file system, and you could write to all the files. So you could have a background process on a Windows notebook, and it would update everything on the device. So when a user called in for support, you knew that their versions were up to date and all the files were up to date. Well, when the smartphone and tablet operating systems were built, they were determined not to make viruses important. Because in the problem with Windows world, if an infection occurred on one particular application, it spread itself throughout the entire environment and infected everything it was connected to. So the smartphone and tablet operating systems built what's called a sandbox architecture, which means that each application can see its files and only its files. It cannot possibly update other things. So we can't do the management techniques we've used for laptops and desktops. So therefore, we've had these two categories. Policy managers basically try to shape what the environment does. They take inventory of what's on the device, and when they don't see what should be there, they shut off access. Think of it as kind of an advanced network access control. The right-hand side is a container, and containers are basically isolated environments that sit in one of the sandboxes. The only unfortunate thing about the containers is that everything you need has to be in there. And if you buy applications that weren't built in that container, they're going to run on the outside, and you're going to need one of the policy managers as well. So I've shown you some examples of the different vendors in the two categories there that we write about. Next slide, please. Now this chart is our magic quadrant. For many of those of you who know Gartner, this is how we evaluate different vendors. And this is our most recent magic quadrant, rating some of the vendors. And you see some of the top ones are Good Technology, AirWatch, Mobile Iron, which we get a lot of calls on. So I'll leave you to read this at some point later in our more extensive document that covers this area. Next slide, please. As I alluded to earlier, tomorrow you should sit down with your application developers and tell them that mobility has exposed a problem that we've always had in how to build applications. We build applications for whatever screen is put in front of the developer. But as we know, and as I've said many times today, there are many different sizes of devices, and we have to build applications to accommodate those different devices. The way we do that is to introduce a third layer in between the device and the application. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to tell the application developer is that they're never, ever again going to build a user interface into their application. They're going to take in XML and output XML. The layer in the middle is going to recognize the incoming device through what's called a user agent header, and using that description of the device and some public internet tables determine what its resource characteristics are, the most important of which, of course, is the screen. Using that information and a little bit of logic, they'll take the XML feed out of the application and render it appropriately for the particular device that's targeted. They can get real sophisticated. They can output HTML5, they can output Silverlight, they can output Java. There's a lot of really clever things these vendors have done. But the bottom line is the architecture is going to change. It's going to change because of this. And if you don't think mobility is enough of a reason, what's changing in monitors is we're going to what's called DisplayPort, 2560 by 1440 pixels. And you're going to look a little crazy after you just build an application. And somebody puts it on a DisplayPort monitor and you got two black strips on either side of your app, right? Mobility exposes a problem. We like to say that mobility is an adjective, not a noun. It exposes things that have always been problems out there, but makes you address them. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned HTML5. HTML5 is being considered by most of the operating system providers as the next big thing. It's going to try to do what Java never achieved, and that's write once, run everywhere. What's different about this is that it's being managed by a standards body rather than a company, Sun, and there's more hope that negotiation among vendors will go well. The biggest promise of HTML5 is that for the first time the browser will work offline. We already have some companies building applications in HTML5. You will use HTML5 because it's the logical successor to HTML4 that we all use today. But the question is, how are you going to build applications in a way that stay in touch with what you need but still remain standard? Every vendor today is going to outpace the ability of the standards body to add things to HTML5. And as a result, you're going to get lots of vendor extensions to HTML5. So what this means is that you're going to have to build applications in such a way where the standard part of HTML5 is kept in one section of your code and the extensions are kept separate. So as you move from device to device, you'll be able to more easily migrate those. In addition, you may find that a tool called an MCAP, or a mobile consumer application platform that we cover, may be a good transition tool. These are tools that output a number of different runtime models, one of which is HTML5. And when you feel comfortable that HTML5 is quiesced to the point there aren't so many changes, you can in fact convert from that tool to HTML5 and go forward, rather than trying to fight the variabilities of HTML5 up front. Let's go to the next slide. So here's a prediction we have about HTML5. By 2015, mobile web technology will have advanced sufficiently such that half the applications that in 2011 would have been written as native apps will be instead delivered as web apps. So that's a pretty aggressive prediction from us, saying you will go this direction. It does mean that the operating system will become less important, as I mentioned before, and that the browser becomes really the big animal for developing and delivering applications. You can see on the left-hand side some of the things that we say that will support this becoming true, and the right-hand side, some of the things that say it won't come true. The biggest one, of course, is the pace at which the vendors are going to add extensions to this technology, negating the true interoperability of this platform. For example, web cameras are handled uniquely by every vendor. and they aren't part of the standard at this point. So just taking pictures or doing video conferencing won't be part of the standard for a while. Next slide, please. And lastly, I want to end up with discussion of app stores. So we all know about all the thousands of applications that are up in the app stores, and I'm sure that many of your users are asking for purchasing cards to be able to go up and buy some of these. And even though they're 99 cents an app, they can get kind of out of control rather quickly as users go through many, many of these devices. The first thing is there's been some good news in that regard. Apple, with iOS 5, at least in the United States, has permitted the volume purchase of App Store apps. So now you can go to an App Store provider, you can cut a deal with them for 1,000 copies, and there's a way through a third-party management server to deliver those apps to your end users under license, and when they depart the organization, to remove those applications if they no longer need them. So that's improved things. You don't have to give people purchasing cards. You don't have to, they still have to have accounts on Apple's App Store, but they can do that a little bit better. But the way Apple does it, and the way Android does it, and the way RIM does it, and the way Microsoft does it is all different. So it could be quite confusing. So more than likely, you're going to need a third-party management server to bring all that together. Now what these management servers will do is they let you host your internally built applications, and they deliver them to the to the device itself. You can update them, manage them, etc., as long as they're under your control. And they will do licensed applications. But anything bought by the consumer is separate. So you won't be able to affect what's on the consumer device, although you can tell what's on there that shouldn't be on there. If you don't like Angry Birds and you don't want to permit access to your environment because they have Angry Birds, you'll be able to shut that off. But you won't be able to control the user's choice of Angry Birds on their personally owned device. Some of these app stores actually have billing in it. You can separate it out. You know, there's a variety of different choices here, and this is still in a lot of flux, mostly because there isn't a common way of doing things. Now, when I was at the federal government about 3 months ago, we talked about the need for developing a federal app store. I'm going to put the same value proposition here, is that someone here needs to think about a California state app store, where the apps are vetted for security and privacy. They're easily purchasable. They've been checked out. There's a lot of garbage applications out there as well that you never want to touch your devices. But I think this should be, the federal government is seeing this as an initiative they need to think about. And I would say that you need to do the same. Next slide. So we'd just like to leave you with some of the documents that we produce to cover this. Almost everything I talked about today is covered in Gartner information. And if you can't find it, we're always available to talk to you about that. We have a booth over here in the next hall. If you need something, just come by and talk to us about it. But we have almost everything I talked about today documented. I gave you a very rough overview of a lot of things. Everything I said is really, really important, we think, for the future of mobility in the California state government and in city governments in California. And we'd like you to think about it. If you run into roadblocks in using anything I said today, call us. We are here to help you through that process until you can make it work. Next slide. And lastly, I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I am a California resident, so I wish you the best of luck in whatever you do. Thank you.